among kids, puberty among American children is starting like years earlier now. Literally 7-year-olds are growing breasts like at an alarming rate. Like we're literally dragging puberty down because all the hormones and all the toxins in our food are changing our biology. Infertility is skyrocketing in the country. We're literally, and this is pronounced happening in America, but happening around the developed world, we're losing our ability to reproduce, to commit our main evolutionary function. Mm-hmm. Infertility is skyrocketing. Male sperm count is down 50% in the past generation. And obviously the chronic diseases among Americans, but particularly among children with, the most staggering statistic we've talked about a lot, 33% of teenagers having prediabetes. I mean, this is the biggest issue in the country. Members of Congress are very frustrated. Back to my early days as a working for the pharma industry, they're being bombarded with study after study saying ultra-processed food is good. They're bombarded with study after study and threat after threat about ruining their political careers if they go against the status quo. So they're really, really figuring out what to do. I think it's optimistic that people are catching on. So if you ask an average mother in this country what her number one concern is, it's that they walk into a classroom and clearly there's something happening with kids. Kids are obese, they're sicker, they're more depressed, everything's going up all at once. And again, going to the Congress, the micro level, the district by district, and you talk about the corruption, the NIH, the majority of grants that they've funded in the past 10 years have gone to researchers with direct conflicts of interest. 8,000 NIH grants have gone out in recent years to to researchers with a literally direct conflict against what they're studying, whether that be nutrition or whether that be pharma. And then what members of Congress are telling me is then the lobbyists from food and pharma come with those studies that have the seals of Harvard, that have the seals of the NIH on them, and slam them on the desk and say, if you go against this study saying that Lucky Charms, that processed cereals are better than eggs, if you go against this study that's saying we've got to prescribe Ozempic, we've got to prescribe more drugs, we've got to prescribe and fund expensive Alzheimer's drugs that are relatively ineffective, that's the way we need to go to cure chronic diseases. And if you go against this, we're going to spend all the money we have to destroy you. That's literally what every congressperson is telling me, that there's direct threats where they're going to run ads in their districts, where they're going to pound the media saying that they're killing old people if they go against pharma. When they get those threats, it's hard for that individual member of Congress to act. But what gives me hope is that I do think there's an incentive on a national leadership scale to talk about these issues, because frankly, it's resonating with voters. I was at a playground with my young son the other day, and every child at that playground is eating ultra-processed food, which they're clearly addicted to. They're clearly obese, and they're on a treadmill of suffering. They're on a treadmill of prediabetes, of obesity, of more and more drugs. So I do think this is catching on, but it's really being spurred by a bottoms-up revolution, frankly, being spurred by people listening to your podcast, listening to Joe Rogan, reading the top books in the country, taking matters into their own hands. And that, frankly, is extremely disruptive. This is the largest industry in the country. I worked for them. They play dirty. And if this happens, if the messages that we're seeing nationally to really investigate what's going on, to really change our paradigm of health, to not have 95% of money spent after people get sick, but actually ask with the $4 trillion we spend in America, how we can actually stay healthy. If those questions actually start being asked, it's very, very disruptive. So there's a lot of opposition to this bottoms up message. Well, quickly on the addiction for kids, Russell, because I think no parent should feel shame. I think we have a system that's rigged against us, and it's empowering to understand that. My dad, who you mentioned at the beginning, who loved meeting you, actually was at Stanford Hospital yesterday. He's fine, but he got he had to have surgery, and my sister accompanied him there, and so she sent me a picture. And the picture was the entrance to the cardiology unit at Stanford Hospital, and there were 2 Coca-Cola machines and a vending machine selling ultra-processed food. Now, working for Coke, I actually worked with them to make sure that Coca-Cola machines were in pediatric wards and schools for young children. That was a huge priority for Coke, and it was very clear and it was very enunciated in the meetings that we wanted to get these things in pediatric units and schools to normalize that for kids. It's very hard to say that this is the root of all of our problems. This is the root of all the cardiology issues, the diabetes issues, all the obesity issues, all the issues we're seeing with kids. If literally, as my son was being born, I walk outside the room in the pediatric ward in Arizona and there's a Coca-Cola machine. So that's by design. So there's a real effort to get your kids addicted. And we've talked about this, and all my knowledge of addiction, once you get somebody addicted and you get them addicted early, it's very hard. So I really feel for parents and kids, that have sugar, by all definitions, is a highly addictive drug, and we're getting kids hooked. So I want to say first to parents, hopefully it's empowering. Don't shame yourself. I think this is potentially an opportunity, and it's an opportunity I'm going to work on, of educating your child about dopamine, about that our system is really rigged against them and to hijack their dopamine. That is how companies make money. And I think unwinding this addiction crisis, quite frankly, that kids are facing is an important conversation where we shouldn't, feel shame, but really be working through this with our kids if our public officials are going to let us down. The three ingredients to your question, and I think the core issue in the country, is the unholy trinity. It's added sugar. In one bottle of Coke, a child is drinking as much sugar as they had in their entire year 100 years ago. Sugar in liquid form is a weapon of mass destruction to blood sugar levels. That's a new phenomenon, really. Putting that sugar, it's like an IV, drinking it in liquid form, particularly in fructose, which is a highly weaponized form of sugar, which is in most sodas, right to the bloodstream, highly addictive, raises the blood sugar level. So that's a big issue. And particularly, with a young child where I can control it, obviously no sugar. Seed oils, industrial byproduct created by John D. Rockefeller 100 years ago, the top source of American calories, very inflammatory. They're omega-6 inflammatory fats instead of omega-3 fats, which we used to eat for all of human history, like olive oil and animal-based fats. Those are also make the food relatively addictive. And then grains, highly processed grains. You've got to ask why food is able to stay on a shelf for years and years and years. That's not natural. The processing is taking the fiber off, which blunts the glucose impact, and that's a lot of the nutrition. So this is frankenfood. And for good measure, we are sprinkling and adding thousands of neurotoxins into the food in America that are not even legal in other countries. If you measure the urine of Americans right now, 90% of them will have high degree of glyphosate in their urine. If you measure mother's breast milk, they've got glyphosate, which is a pesticide we're putting on foods in their breast milk. We have tons of neurotoxins that we're putting in food because we have a completely unregulated market. When I was, young and a conservative and working for these companies, I used to say, well, we don't want the nanny state. We don't want any regulations on these food companies. That actually was a perversion of conservative principles. What's a nanny state and what's a perversion of the free market is that these companies have gotten a completely free reign. They're self-policing. There's no oversight, and they're literally putting poison in our food.